My name is Marissa, and I am 28 years old. If someone had told me years ago that my life would be torn apart not by strangers, but by the very people who called themselves family, I would have laughed it off. I was always the kind of woman who believed in love, in trust, in the promises whispered late at night when two hearts felt certain they had found their forever. I wanted a simple life, a happy marriage, a warm home. Instead, I found myself standing in a courtroom one day, watching the people who once sat across from me at the dinner table being sentenced for crimes that almost destroyed me. It feels strange to say it now, but this story is mine, and it begins not with betrayal but with love. I can still remember the smell of coffee in the office break room where I first met Matthew. Back then, I was new to Brookhaven, trying to settle into a job I cared deeply about. He was already there, confident, charming, with an easy smile that made even the most stressful deadlines seem less heavy. Our first conversation was nothing extraordinary. He simply held the door open for me and joked that I looked more awake than anyone else at 8 in the morning. It was silly, but it made me laugh, and that laugh carried into the weeks that followed. When I think of those early days, I see two people who truly believed in each other. We spent hours working side by side, exchanging little glances across our desks, staying late to finish projects no one else wanted to touch. There was a natural rhythm between us, as if our lives had been waiting to sync. He started bringing me coffee without asking how I liked it, because by then he already knew. We began sharing lunches, then dinners, and slowly, moments outside the office became the most precious part of my day. One evening, after another long day, he walked me to my car. The parking lot was almost empty, the air heavy with the scent of rain, and he said quietly, "I don't want to imagine a life without you in it." I froze, my heart pounding so fast I could hear it in my ears. It wasn't a grand declaration, no flowers, no kneeling. It was just raw honesty. That was the night I knew I had fallen for him completely. I never imagined then that this same man, the one who swore to protect me from the world, would one day be the one to push me out of his home without even listening to the truth. But that is how life works sometimes. Love blinds us, loyalty tests us, and betrayal shapes us into who we are meant to become. And so, my story begins with hope, but it carries the scars of what followed. When I look back, it almost feels like fate had placed Matthew and me in the same office, just so our paths would cross. Brookhaven was a city bustling with life, full of people chasing their own dreams, and yet in that crowded place, I felt like I had found someone who truly saw me. Matthew wasn't just another coworker. He became the person who turned ordinary days into something worth remembering. At first, it was the small things. He would stop by my desk with a teasing smile, asking if I was planning to single-handedly finish the mountain of paperwork before me. He had a way of making me laugh even when I was stressed. Soon, those little interactions grew into something more. We would take our lunch breaks together, sitting in the cafeteria and talking about everything from our favorite childhood memories to our goals for the future. He told me he dreamed of starting his own business someday, while I confessed that I simply wanted a family filled with love and warmth. He listened, not with half an ear, but with his whole heart. The late evenings at the office became my favorite. Most employees would leave as soon as the clock struck 5, but Matthew and I often stayed behind, finishing reports or preparing presentations. The glow of computer screens lit the room, and there were times when it felt like we were the only two people in the entire building. He would glance at me across the room and smile, and that single look made all the exhaustion fade away. I remember one particular night more vividly than the rest. A project deadline had kept us both working late, and by the time we wrapped up, it was almost midnight. As we walked out together, the city streets were quiet, and the moonlight cast a silver glow on everything. He offered to drive me home, and during the ride, we spoke less but felt more. When he dropped me off, there was a pause, the kind that lingers with unspoken words. He finally said, "Marissa, being around you feels like coming home." That was the first time I felt the weight of his feelings, and it terrified me just as much as it thrilled me. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I knew something irreversible had begun. Over the next few weeks, we grew inseparable. Colleagues noticed, whispering about the two of us, but we didn't care. Our bond was becoming stronger than any rumor could break. And then came the moment I will never forget. On a rainy Friday evening, Matthew stood by my desk after everyone had left. His hair was damp from the storm outside, his shirt clinging slightly from the drizzle. He looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Marissa," he said softly, "I don't want to wait anymore. I love you. I want you in my life, always." I could feel my entire world shift in that instant. The girl who once thought love was a distant dream was now standing at the edge of it, trembling but ready to dive in. I said yes, not with hesitation, but with a certainty that came from the very core of my soul. I didn't know it then, but that confession was the beginning of a journey that would lead me not only to joy, but also to heartbreak. For in Matthew's love, I found my strength, and in his betrayal, I would later find my courage. When Matthew proposed marriage, I thought it would be the happiest moment of my life. He wasn't extravagant in the way he asked. It was simple, heartfelt, and true. We were walking through a quiet park in Brookhaven, the air heavy with the scent of fresh grass after rain, when he turned to me and said, "Marissa, I don't want a life where you're not beside me. Will you marry me?" My heart leapt, and without hesitation, I said yes. For that moment, the world felt perfect. But perfection doesn't last forever. The first sign of resistance came from his family. Gloria, his mother, barely managed a forced smile when we broke the news. Her words were polite, but her eyes carried disapproval sharp enough to cut. Vanessa, his younger sister, didn't even try to hide her dislike. She smirked and said, "Well, Matthew always had a way of surprising us." The tone was drenched in sarcasm, and I knew instantly that winning her acceptance would be impossible. Matthew, however, stood firm. He looked straight at his mother and sister and declared, "Marissa is the woman I love, and I'm going to marry her, whether you approve or not." That statement gave me courage, but it also planted a seed of tension that would grow into something darker later. Our wedding day was bittersweet. My parents, Thomas and Diane, were radiant with pride, tears shimmering in their eyes as they watched me walk down the aisle. They welcomed Matthew as their own son, showering him with warmth and affection. But on the other side, I could see Gloria and Vanessa, their stiff posture and cold expressions betraying their true feelings. They smiled for appearances, but every gesture felt hollow. At the reception, when everyone else was dancing and celebrating, Gloria sat quietly in a corner, whispering to Vanessa. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, calculating. At one point, Vanessa walked past me and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Enjoy it while it lasts." My chest tightened, but I forced myself to ignore her. After all, this was my wedding day. The first weeks of marriage were full of hope. Matthew and I moved into his family's house, a spacious home in Brookhaven. I tried my best to blend in, to be respectful, to show kindness. I cooked meals with Gloria, helped with chores, and even offered to share expenses for groceries and bills. For a short time, I thought things might improve. But slowly, the mask slipped. Gloria began questioning every small thing I did, whether it was how I folded laundry or how much salt I added to dinner. Vanessa made snide remarks about my clothes, my background, and even my laughter. It became clear they had never wanted me there, and now that I was, they were determined to make me feel like an outsider. Matthew noticed the tension, but instead of confronting it, he brushed it aside. "They'll come around," he said, pulling me close in bed one night. "Just give them time." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love could fix everything. But deep down, a quiet fear had begun to grow in me. I had no idea then just how far Gloria and Vanessa were willing to go. It started with a conversation that I will never forget. Gloria and Vanessa called me into the living room one afternoon, their expressions hard and unreadable. I thought perhaps they wanted to discuss household chores or family plans. Instead, Gloria folded her arms and said in a voice cold as steel, "If you want to live in this house, you'll need to contribute properly. From now on, you must give us $5,000 every month. That's not negotiable." For a moment, I just stared at her, convinced I had misheard. 5,000. I repeated, my voice trembling. That was more than most people's monthly salary. It was a demand designed to crush me, to remind me I didn't belong. Vanessa leaned forward, a smirk curling on her lips. Think of it as rent for the privilege of being here. We're not running a charity. If you can't manage that, maybe you should reconsider if this house is really for you. My chest tightened, anger rising beneath my shock. I married Matthew, not a contract. I will contribute in fair ways, but I won't let you extort me, I said firmly, though my hand shook. Gloria's eyes narrowed. Extort? You should be grateful we even allow you under this roof. Without us, Matthew would have never even looked your way. I felt the sting of her words, but forced myself to stay calm. That evening, I tried to explain everything to Matthew. They're asking for money every month, $5,000, Matthew. It's unreasonable. He sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. Maybe they just want to make sure you're serious about being part of this family. Serious? I snapped. Do you think my love for you is measured in money? This isn't about contributing, it's about control. But instead of defending me, Matthew grew silent. His silence hurt more than their insults. The following weeks were unbearable. Vanessa wouldn't let a single day pass without reminding me. Where's our $5,000, Marissa? Don't tell me you're broke already. She'd sneer at breakfast. Gloria would sigh dramatically whenever I entered the room, muttering about how some women were only good at draining others. I began to feel trapped, like a guest overstaying her welcome in her own marriage. Every corner of the house whispered their disapproval. I avoided family meals, choosing instead to eat alone in my room, but even there I could hear their voices through the walls, mocking me, belittling me. One evening, as I sat in the dark trying to hold back tears, I realized what this was really about. The $5,000 was never meant as financial help. It was a weapon, a test, a way to force me to bend or break. And Gloria and Vanessa weren't going to stop until one of those things happened. I clung to Matthew's words from the past, his promises that he would always protect me. But those promises were beginning to sound like distant echoes. He was slipping further away, pulled by the constant poison his mother and sister poured into his ears. And I could feel it. The storm was coming. The storm I feared began to take shape in ways I couldn't control. Gloria and Vanessa didn't just stop at financial demands. They worked tirelessly to chip away at the foundation of my marriage. Every whisper, every glance, every carefully planted seed of doubt was designed to turn Matthew against me. It started small. Gloria would sigh heavily whenever I entered the kitchen, as though my presence alone exhausted her. If dinner wasn't seasoned exactly the way she preferred, she'd push the plate aside and mutter, "Some women just aren't made to be wives." Vanessa, meanwhile, made her taunts more direct. One morning, as I poured myself a cup of coffee, she leaned on the counter and said with a smirk, "You know, Matthew deserves someone who can actually contribute. $5,000 a month is nothing for a real woman." I clenched my jaw, refusing to respond. I had promised myself I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. But the silence only seemed to embolden her. Behind closed doors, Gloria began weaving her stories. I caught fragments of her conversations with Matthew. "She's hiding money. I can feel it. She's selfish, Matthew. She doesn't respect this family. She's trying to drive a wedge between us." Each word was like a drop of poison seeping into his mind. At first, Matthew defended me. "Mom, stop. You don't know what you're talking about," I overheard him say one night. But the constant repetition wore him down. Slowly, his tone shifted. He began coming home later, spending less time talking to me, brushing off my concerns with a distracted, "Not now, Marissa." The distance between us grew like a crack in a mirror, small at first, then spreading until everything was fractured. I reached out to him, desperate to hold on. "Matthew, please listen to me. They're twisting things. You know I would never do anything to hurt this family." But instead of reassurance, I got silence. Or worse, a tired shake of his head. "Why does it always feel like you're in conflict with them? Can't you just try harder, Marissa?" His words cut deeper than any insult from Gloria or Vanessa ever could. I wanted to scream that I had been trying, that I had bet myself in 1,000 ways to fit into their expectations, but he wasn't listening. He didn't want to listen. Nights became the hardest. I would lie awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling his body turned away from mine. The warmth that once existed between us had been replaced with a cold void. I wondered if he even remembered the promises he made to me under the stars, in the quiet of our early love. And still, Gloria and Vanessa pressed on. They circled me like wolves, waiting for the moment I would finally stumble. They knew the power of words, and they used them like weapons, sharp, relentless, and devastating. I could feel myself slipping into a state of constant dread, bracing for the next insult, the next manipulation, the next moment when Matthew would choose them over me. It was only a matter of time before something broke. And when it did, it shattered everything. The breaking point came on an afternoon that started like any other, but it ended up marking the moment my world came crashing down. I had been in the kitchen, trying to keep myself busy with something as simple as preparing tea, when Vanessa walked in with her usual swagger. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her eyes filled with the same mocking contempt I had grown to dread. "So, Marissa," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "have you finally decided how you're going to pay us this month? Or are you planning on freeloading again?" I closed my eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. I had promised myself that I wouldn't rise to her bait, but there was only so much cruelty a person could endure. "Vanessa, I've told you already. I am not giving you $5,000 every month. This is not a business arrangement. It's a marriage. You need to stop." Her smirk turned into a sneer. "Don't act like you're above us. You walked into this house with nothing. You should be grateful we even let you stay here." The words burned. My hands trembled as I placed the teacup down, the sound of porcelain clinking against the saucer louder than it should have been. I turned to face her fully. "You don't get to talk to me this way. I've respected this family, I've tried to fit in, but you and your mother have done nothing but try to humiliate me. Enough, Vanessa. Enough." Something in my tone must have struck her, because her eyes narrowed with fury. She stepped closer, her voice rising. "How dare you talk to me like that in my house?" "It's my house too." I shot back, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and courage. "I am Matthew's wife, and you don't get to treat me like garbage." The room filled with tension so thick I could barely breathe. And then, in the chaos of our shouting, Vanessa's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. The screen cracked, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence that followed. Vanessa's eyes widened, but instead of admitting the accident, she clutched at the moment like a weapon. She bent down, picked up the shattered phone, and turned toward me with a face twisted in rage. "You did this. You broke my phone on purpose." Before I could even respond, her hand flew across my face. The slap was so hard that my head snapped to the side, a sting spreading through my cheek. My eyes watered, not just from the pain but from the shock of how far things had escalated. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. "I didn't touch your phone," I whispered, my voice trembling. But she wasn't listening. Gloria came rushing in, alarmed by the noise. Vanessa immediately burst into tears, clutching the broken phone as if it were a priceless heirloom. "She did it, Mom. She smashed it on purpose," and then yelled at me. Gloria's eyes locked on me with a fury I had never seen before. "Marissa, how dare you?" she hissed, her voice rising with every word. "First you refused to contribute, and now you're destroying our things? You've brought nothing but shame to this house." I stood there, stunned, my face still stinging, my chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to shout the truth at the top of my lungs, but my voice felt locked in my throat. And then the front door opened, and Matthew walked in. He looked from Gloria to Vanessa, both of them crying and clutching each other, then to me, standing there alone with red eyes and a flushed cheek. I could see the judgment forming in his gaze before I even had a chance to speak. And in that moment, I knew they had finally won. The moment Matthew stepped inside, the air seemed to thicken, heavy with accusation. Vanessa rushed toward him, her broken phone in hand, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Matthew, she did this," she cried, pointing straight at me. "She threw my phone and broke it. And when I tried to stop her, she hit me." Gloria placed a hand dramatically over her chest, her eyes wide with feigned shock. "Your wife has lost all respect for this family. She insulted us, attacked your sister, and now she's trying to play the victim. We've tolerated her long enough." I felt my stomach twist. The lies rolled off their tongues so easily, so convincingly, as though they had rehearsed this very scene. My throat tightened as I tried to find my voice. "Matthew, listen to me," I pleaded, stepping closer. "I didn't touch her phone. It fell, she's lying. And she slapped me. Look at my face." But Matthew didn't look at me the way he used to. His eyes, once filled with love and warmth, were now clouded with anger and doubt. He glanced at Vanessa's cracked phone, then back at his mother and sister, who clung to each other as if they were the injured ones. "Enough, Marissa," he snapped, his tone sharper than a blade. "I've heard enough excuses from you. They wouldn't make this up." The words cut deeper than Vanessa's slap. My heart dropped, my chest aching as though it might split open. "You think I'm lying?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "After everything we've been through, after all the promises you made, you believe them over me?" His jaw tightened, his silence an answer louder than any words. He walked toward me, his face stern, and before I could step back, he grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, almost painful. "Matthew, don't," I begged, tears spilling down my cheeks. But he didn't listen. With Gloria and Vanessa watching triumphantly, he dragged me to the front door. My feet stumbled against the hardwood floor, my heart pounding in disbelief. "Get out," he said, his voice cold and final. "You've disrespected my family for the last time. I don't want to hear another word." He pulled the door open and, with one swift motion, pushed me outside. I stumbled onto the porch, the evening air hitting me like ice. Behind him, Gloria and Vanessa stood in the hallway, their faces twisted with satisfaction. The door slammed shut. For a long moment, I stood frozen, staring at the wood grain of that closed door as if it could somehow open again, as if Matthew would suddenly realize what he had done and pull me back into his arms. But the silence on the other side told me everything. The man I loved, the man who once swore to protect me, had chosen them. I walked away from that house with tears streaming down my face, my body trembling with rage and sorrow. The home that was supposed to be my safe place had turned into a battlefield, and I was the casualty. But what they didn't know, what even I didn't fully realize in that moment, was that this betrayal, as devastating as it was, would become the beginning of my fight for truth. By the time I reached my parents' home, my body felt heavy, as though every step carried the weight of betrayal. My father, Thomas, opened the door before I could even knock properly. One look at my tear-stained face and the redness on my cheek, and his expression hardened. "Marissa, what happened?" he demanded, his voice filled with both fear and anger. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "He threw me out, Dad." Matthew believed them. He didn't even let me explain. My mother, Diane, rushed in from the living room, wrapping her arms around me as though she could shield me from the pain. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, stroking my hair. "You're safe now. You're home." We sat in the living room while I poured out everything, the constant demands for $5,000, the daily taunts, the manipulations, and finally, the phone incident. With every word, I saw the fury deepen in my father's eyes and the sorrow weigh heavier on my mother's face. "You should never have had to endure this," Thomas said firmly. "They used you, humiliated you, and then Matthew betrayed your trust. Enough is enough." For a moment I hesitated. "But I still love him, Dad. I loved him so much. How do I just walk away?" My mother squeezed my hand gently, her voice steady but compassionate. "Love should never cost you your dignity, Marissa. A man who truly loves you wouldn't throw you out into the night just because his mother and sister cried wolf. You deserve better." Her words pierced through the fog of confusion clouding my mind. She was right. I had given everything, my trust, my loyalty, my heart. And in return, I had been discarded like I was nothing. That night, my parents insisted I stay with them for as long as I needed. They prepared the guest room, making it warm and comfortable, as if to erase the coldness I had just endured. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of safety. The next morning, Thomas sat me down at the kitchen table, his voice calm but firm. "We need to take action. This isn't just about the way they treated you. It's about justice. We'll get you a divorce, and we'll make sure their lies don't go unpunished." Diane nodded in agreement. "And you won't face this alone. We'll be with you every step of the way." Hearing their support gave me the courage I thought I had lost. Later that afternoon, we contacted Peter Hayes, a respected lawyer in Brookhaven. He listened intently as I recounted everything, taking notes, his eyes narrowing at the mention of financial demands and the false accusations. "Marissa," Peter said finally, leaning forward, "what they did to you is not just cruel, it's unlawful. Demanding money in that way, spreading lies, physically assaulting you, and then manipulating your husband to throw you out, we can build a strong case. If we can get proof, they won't be able to walk away unscathed." I swallowed hard, my voice still weak. Proof? That's the problem. They twisted everything so well. Peter gave me a reassuring smile. Sometimes, the truth has a way of revealing itself.
For now, rest.
I'll start preparing the divorce petition, and we'll look into every possible angle for evidence. For the first time since Matthew had pushed me out of that house, I felt a spark of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but with my parents' unwavering support and Peter's determination, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, justice could still be mine. A week after I had moved back into my parents' house, I was still trying to piece myself together. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake replaying the moment Matthew grabbed my arm and shoved me out of his house. My cheek had healed from Vanessa's slap, but the bruise on my heart remained raw. One quiet afternoon, as I sat in the living room staring blankly at the soft glow of sunlight through the curtains, the doorbell rang. Diane went to answer it, and when she returned, she wasn't alone. Standing behind her was Angela, the housemaid who had worked for Matthew's family for years. "Marissa," Diane said gently, "Angela is here to see you." I sat up, surprised. Angela looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if she had to make sure no one had followed her. When she finally stepped inside, her voice trembled. "Miss Marissa," she began, her eyes brimming with concern, "I had to come. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Angela took out her phone and held it tightly, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "The day of the fight," she whispered, "I was in the hallway. I saw everything. I recorded it." My breath caught in my throat. You recorded it?" She nodded quickly, her hands shaking as she unlocked her phone. "I knew they would twist the truth. I've seen them scheme against you before, and I didn't want them to destroy you completely. So, when the yelling started, I pressed record." She handed me the phone, and with trembling fingers, I pressed play. There it was, the entire scene captured with perfect clarity. The video showed Vanessa screaming at me, shoving me, and then her phone slipping from her hand onto the floor. The sound of the screen cracking was clear, followed by Vanessa deliberately slamming it harder against the tiles before turning toward me. It showed her raising her hand and slapping me across the face. My chest tightened as tears blurred my vision. It was the truth, the undeniable truth, right there on a tiny screen. Angela's voice broke through my sobs. "They set you up, Miss Marissa." I couldn't stay silent. "I know they'll fire me if they ever find out I came here, but I couldn't let you suffer for something you didn't do." I reached out and gripped her hands tightly. "Angela, you don't know what this means to me. You might have just saved my life." Diane placed a supportive hand on my shoulder, her eyes shining with relief. "This is exactly what Peter needs. With this, there's no way the court can ignore what they've done." Thomas, who had been standing quietly, spoke firmly. "We'll take this straight to your lawyer. Justice is finally within reach." For the first time since that awful day, I felt like I could breathe again. The burden I'd been carrying wasn't just mine anymore. The truth had been captured, and it was powerful. Angela smiled faintly, her voice soft but steady. You deserve to be free of them, Marissa. Use this. Don't let them win. As she left, I held the phone against my chest, the screen still glowing with proof of their cruelty. It wasn't just a recording, it was hope. It was the weapon I needed to fight back. The day we walked into the courthouse in Brookhaven, my heart pounded so hard it felt like the walls could hear it. I had barely slept the night before. My palms were clammy, and my stomach churned with a mix of fear and anticipation. But when I looked at my father Thomas's steady expression, my mother Diane's reassuring smile, and Peter Hayes carrying the case file with quiet confidence, I reminded myself why I was here. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for my dignity, for the truth. Gloria and Vanessa sat at the opposite table, dressed in polished clothes, their faces twisted into masks of innocence. Vanessa looked fragile, clutching her broken phone as though it were a sacred relic. Gloria sat beside her with the smug expression of a woman who believed she had already won. And then there was Matthew, sitting just behind them, his face unreadable. He didn't look at me once. Judge Miller entered, and the room rose to its feet before settling into silence. His presence alone carried authority, his gaze sharp as he opened the proceedings. Peter Hayes began with a calm but firm statement. Your Honor, my client Marissa has been subjected to financial extortion, emotional abuse, and false accusations by her husband's mother and sister. Today, we will present evidence that not only clears her name, but proves deliberate fraud and malicious intent. Gloria scoffed quietly, shaking her head. Vanessa dabbed her eyes with a tissue, already preparing her performance. The first witness was Angela. She walked to the stand, nervous but determined. When asked to explain what she had seen, her voice wavered at first, but grew stronger with each sentence. I was in the hallway the day of the fight. I saw Vanessa drop her phone, then slam it against the floor herself. I saw her slap Marissa. I recorded everything, because I knew they would lie. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Peter held up Angela's phone. Your Honor, here's the video. Judge Miller nodded, and the footage played on the screen. Every second felt like an eternity. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of Vanessa's voice screaming, the phone hitting the floor, and the sharp crack of her hand across my face. It was all there, unfiltered, undeniable. When the video ended, the room was electric with tension. Gloria's face had drained of color, while Vanessa stared down at her lap, her performance of innocence collapsing. But Peter wasn't finished. He presented a stack of documents, receipts Gloria and Vanessa had used for months to exaggerate household expenses. These were presented as genuine costs to pressure Marissa into paying $5,000 every month. But upon investigation, we found that these receipts were falsified, overstated, duplicated, or outright fabricated. This was fraud, Your Honor. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. I watched as Matthew shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. Gloria's attorney attempted to object, claiming the video was taken without consent and the receipts were misunderstandings. But Judge Miller raised a hand, silencing the room. I have seen enough. The evidence speaks clearly. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of finality. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of strength flow through me. They had tried to bury me under lies, but the truth had risen, undeniable and unshakable. And in that courtroom, surrounded by the very people who had once mocked and humiliated me, I knew justice was finally within reach. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating as Judge Miller adjusted his glasses and looked down at the papers before him. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, waiting for the words that would either vindicate or condemn. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, my heart pounding so loudly that I could barely hear anything else. Finally, his deep voice filled the room. This court has reviewed the evidence presented. The video clearly shows Vanessa not only breaking her own phone but also striking Marissa. The receipts submitted as household expenses were falsified and deliberately used to pressure the plaintiff for money. Gloria and Vanessa's actions amount to fraud, false accusations, and domestic abuse. A wave of relief washed over me, though my body trembled. I gripped the edge of my chair, barely able to breathe as he continued. Therefore, Judge Miller declared, his gaze firm on the defendants, Gloria and Vanessa are sentenced to 5 years in state prison. This sentence is without suspension, as the severity of their actions demonstrates malicious intent. Matthew, while not found guilty of fraud, is hereby warned for his negligence and blind faith in falsehoods. This court grants Marissa a divorce, effective immediately. The words felt surreal, like a dream I had been waiting to wake from. But this wasn't a dream. It was justice. Gloria's face turned pale as stone, her lips trembling, yet no words came out. Vanessa let out a sharp sob, clutching at her mother as the bailiffs moved closer. The satisfaction in seeing their charade crumble before the entire courtroom was unlike anything I had ever felt. I turned my head slightly, catching Matthew's eyes for the first time. His face was stricken, torn between shock and guilt. For a fleeting second, I thought he might speak, might apologize, but he said nothing. And in that silence, I realized that I no longer needed his words. His betrayal had already spoken louder than any apology ever could. As the gavel came down, sealing the verdict, I felt something inside me lift. The weight that had pressed on my chest for months, the humiliation, the doubt, the pain, it all began to unravel. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't born of despair. They were tears of release. When the proceedings ended, Peter Hayes placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Marissa. You did it. The truth won." My parents were by my side instantly. Thomas pulled me into a strong embrace, whispering, "I'm proud of you, my daughter." Diane kissed my forehead, her own eyes glistening with relief. "You're free now, Marissa. You never have to go back to that house again." I stepped out of the courthouse into the cool Brookhaven air, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow across the city. For the first time in a long time, I felt the warmth of freedom on my skin. I wasn't just Marissa, the woman who had been thrown out of her husband's home. I was Marissa, the woman who had fought back and won. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would never let anyone break me again. Walking out of the courthouse that day felt like stepping into a new world. The sky above Brookhaven seemed brighter, the air fresher, as if the universe itself had conspired to tell me that the worst was finally behind me. I breathed in deeply, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the sunlight warm my face. For months, I had lived under shadows of fear and betrayal. Now, those shadows had been replaced with something I thought I had lost forever: hope. The days that followed were not without their challenges, but they were filled with freedom. I settled back into my parents' home, and Thomas and Diane surrounded me with love and patience. My father would remind me every morning, "This is your second chance, Marissa. Don't look back." My mother, ever gentle, filled the house with comfort, meals, laughter, small gestures that made me feel alive again. But I knew I couldn't depend on them forever. I needed to stand on my own feet, to prove to myself that I was more than the scars Gloria and Vanessa tried to leave behind. So, I started looking for work again. Returning to an office wasn't easy. The memories of where my love story with Matthew had begun often haunted me, but I pushed through. I found a position at a local firm in Brookhaven, and for the first time in a long time, I felt purpose return to my days. Evenings were mine to rebuild. I began writing in a journal, pouring my heart into words. I met with old friends I had distanced myself from during my marriage, slowly weaving back connections I thought I had lost. I even took a cooking class downtown, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to do something that was purely for me. Each small step was like laying a brick for the foundation of the life I was determined to create. Sometimes, memories of Matthew would sneak in, his smile in those early days, the promises whispered under the stars. At first, those memories hurt, reopening wounds I thought had healed. But as weeks turned into months, I realized those memories no longer controlled me. They were part of my past, lessons etched into my soul. He had chosen to betray me, and that choice was his burden to carry, not mine. The news of Gloria and Vanessa's imprisonment spread quickly through Brookhaven. Neighbors who once gossiped about me now looked at me with a mix of sympathy and respect. Some even approached me in the grocery store, saying things like, "Good for you, Marissa. It's about time someone stood up to them." I never gloated, never smiled at their downfall, but inside, I knew justice had been served. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my parents' home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about the $5,000 they had demanded from me every month. That money had been their weapon, their way of breaking me. Yet in the end, it wasn't money that defined me. It was truth, resilience, and the courage to stand tall when they tried to drag me down. I whispered softly to myself, almost like a promise. They try to put a price on my worth, but I know now I am priceless. Life was no longer about survival. It was about living on my terms with my choices. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, I knew this was only the beginning of a story that belonged entirely to me. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more powerful stories like this, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more stories that inspire, move, and keep you engaged.